The security camera footage would later show exactly what happened at 6:23 p.m. on a Thursday evening inside a Whole Foods in Arlington, Virginia. A well-dressed black man in his early 30s stood in the produce section, phone in one hand, a bag of organic apples in the other. He was doing nothing wrong. He was barely doing anything at all. Off-duty police officer Raymond Coulter spotted him from across the store, and something in his expression shifted. He started walking toward the man with purpose, hand already moving toward his concealed weapon beneath his jacket. What Officer Coulter didn't know was that he had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. One decision that would trigger a federal investigation, result in a $3.2 million jury verdict, and expose a pattern of racial profiling that should have been stopped years earlier. The security cameras were recording from 4 different angles. A dozen shoppers had their phones out within minutes, and Raymond Coulter was about to destroy everything he had spent 14 years building. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to the light. Marcus Webb had graduated first in his class from Yale Law School. Before that, he earned his undergraduate degree summa cum laude from Howard University, where he was editor of the Law Review. He had clerked for a federal appeals court judge before landing the most prestigious position a young lawyer could achieve, a clerkship at the Supreme Court of the United States. He worked directly with Justice Elena Kagan, reviewing cases that would shape American law for generations. He had access to documents most lawyers would never see in their entire careers. He had been entrusted with secrets that affected the highest levels of government. His background check had been more thorough than most FBI agents undergo. Marcus was the kind of person who still called his mother every Sunday, who volunteered at a legal aid clinic on weekends, who remembered the names of every security guard and janitor at the Supreme Court building. Nothing about him suggested trouble. Everything about him suggested excellence. That Thursday evening, Marcus had one simple goal: pick up groceries for dinner. He was making his grandmother's jambalaya recipe for his girlfriend's birthday. He needed andouille sausage, bell peppers, and a few other items. Simple, routine, forgettable. He had no idea that a trip to the grocery store would change his life and cost a police officer everything. Raymond Coulter was off duty but still carrying his badge and service weapon. He had stopped at the Whole Foods to pick up a 6-pack of beer on his way home from his shift with the Arlington County Police Department. He was 47 years old, with 14 years on the force, and a file that his supervisors had been ignoring for far too long. He spotted Marcus in the produce section, a young black man in dress slacks and a button-down shirt, examining avocados. Marcus's phone was in his left hand. His wallet was in his right. He was reaching into his pocket to put the phone away so he could grab a shopping basket. Coulter watched this ordinary action and decided he was witnessing a theft in progress. He approached Marcus near the organic vegetables, walking with the kind of aggressive purpose that Marcus had learned to recognize. The body language was all wrong. The hand near the hip, the squared shoulders, the jaw set tight. Coulter didn't identify himself as a police officer. He didn't explain why he was approaching. He simply demanded that Marcus come with him right now. Marcus looked up, confused. He asked what was going on. He had a bag of apples in his hand and a phone in his pocket. He was standing in the middle of a grocery store at dinner time. Nothing about this situation made sense. Coulter accused him of putting something in his pocket. The accusation was ridiculous. Marcus had put his own phone in his own pocket. That was the extent of his supposed crime. Marcus explained calmly that he was reaching for his phone. He showed Coulter the phone. He showed him his wallet. He was being cooperative despite the absurdity of the situation. But then Coulter asked the question that told Marcus exactly what this was really about. "What are you doing in this store?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The implication was crystal clear. What was a young black man doing in an upscale grocery store in this particular neighborhood? The assumption underneath the words was disgusting and unmistakable. Marcus looked around the store. White customers moved freely through the aisles. An elderly white woman was examining the same display of avocados just a few feet away. A white man in gym clothes had his hands in his pockets as he walked toward the checkout. Nobody was questioning their right to be there. Marcus noticed all of this. He had trained himself to notice everything. When you grew up black in America, you learned to pay attention to these details. They could save your life. He answered Coulter's question politely. He said he was buying groceries, same as everyone else in the store. He said he lived in the area. He said he had every right to be there. Coulter did not like that answer. Coulter told Marcus to put his hands where he could see them. Marcus complied immediately. He raised both hands slowly, still holding the bag of apples and his wallet. He asked again what was happening and whether he was being detained. Coulter said he was conducting an investigation. He didn't explain what crime he was investigating. He didn't have any reason to suspect one. He just kept escalating. He grabbed Marcus's arm and told him to turn around. Marcus asked on what grounds he was being detained. He said he knew his rights. He said he was an attorney. Coulter laughed. He said, "Sure you are," in a tone dripping with contempt. Quick question for you all. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something like this? Type yes in the comments if you have. This was Coulter's second massive mistake, and the consequences were already piling up. Physically grabbing someone without reasonable suspicion or probable cause constitutes assault. Detaining someone without legal justification is false imprisonment. Coulter was racking up civil rights violations with every passing second. Marcus told Coulter clearly and calmly that he did not consent to being searched. He stated that he was invoking his Fourth Amendment rights. He said that without probable cause, any search or seizure would be unconstitutional. Coulter responded by telling Marcus to shut up. Other shoppers were starting to notice. A woman in yoga pants stopped her cart and stared. An older gentleman looked up from the cheese display with concern on his face. The store manager emerged from a back room, drawn by the raised voices. A teenage girl pulled out her phone and started recording. Then her mother did the same. Within 30 seconds, 4 different phones were capturing the scene from multiple angles. Coulter produced a pair of handcuffs from his back pocket. Even off-duty, even without jurisdiction over any alleged crime, even without any actual crime being committed, he was about to handcuff a citizen in the middle of a grocery store. Marcus told him again that he was making a serious mistake. He told him he worked for the Supreme Court. He told him he was a law clerk for Justice Kagan. Coulter snapped the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. He said that was a nice story, but he'd heard them all before. The handcuffs were tight. They bit into Marcus's skin. He would later have bruises on both wrists that would take 2 weeks to fade. Coulter pulled Marcus's wallet from his hand and began rifling through it. He found credit cards, a driver's license, and then he found something that should have stopped him cold. A Supreme Court of the United States Employee Identification Badge. The badge had Marcus's photo, his name, and the seal of the Supreme Court. It was laminated and official. It was unmistakably real. Coulter stared at it. Then he kept searching anyway. This was his third massive mistake. He had already seen evidence that Marcus was exactly who he said he was, and he chose to ignore it. He continued his illegal search. He pulled out Marcus's phone. He examined his keys. He patted down his pockets. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. The store manager approached and asked what was going on. Coulter flashed his badge and told her to stay back, that he was conducting police business. She complied but looked deeply uncomfortable. She knew something was wrong here. Marcus stood in handcuffs, his groceries scattered on the floor, his dignity being stripped away in front of dozens of strangers. His face remained calm, but inside he was experiencing a combination of rage, humiliation, and a cold determination to make sure this officer faced consequences. Coulter called 911 from his personal cell phone. The call would later become crucial evidence. He identified himself as an off-duty officer and reported that he had detained a shoplifting suspect who was resisting and claiming to be a federal employee. Both claims were lies. Marcus had not been shoplifting. Marcus had not resisted. The 911 recording captured these false statements clearly. 2 on-duty Arlington County officers arrived within 8 minutes. Officers Diane Foster and Kevin Park pulled up to find a scene that immediately concerned them. A black man in dress clothes stood in handcuffs near the produce section. He was calm and compliant. His supposed crime was nowhere in evidence. And an off-duty officer who had no business making an arrest was standing over him looking agitated. Foster approached first. She asked Coulter for a quick summary of what had happened. Coulter said he observed the suspect concealing merchandise and that the suspect became hostile when confronted. Foster looked at Marcus. He was standing perfectly still. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His expression was controlled. He did not look hostile. He looked like a professional man having the worst day of his life. She asked Marcus for his version of events. Marcus, still completely calm, explained that he was a law clerk at the Supreme Court. He said his identification was in his wallet, which Officer Coulter had taken. He said he had done nothing wrong and had been detained without cause. Foster glanced at Park. The look they exchanged said everything. They both knew something was very wrong with this situation. Do you think body cameras make a difference in cases like this? Let us know in the comments. Foster asked Coulter if he had looked at the man's identification. Coulter said he had seen some badge, but that anyone could fake those things. Foster walked over to where Marcus's wallet lay on a nearby display. She picked up the Supreme Court badge and examined it carefully. The badge had a holographic seal. It had a security chip embedded in the corner. It had Marcus's name and photo. She asked Coulter if he had called to verify the badge. Coulter said he hadn't gotten around to it yet. Foster pulled out her phone and called the Supreme Court police directly. The number was easy enough to find. She asked them to verify if a Marcus Webb was employed there. The response came in less than a minute. Yes, Marcus Webb was an active law clerk. Yes, his employee badge number matched the one Foster was reading off. Yes, he was exactly who he claimed to be. Foster ended the call and turned to Coulter with an expression of barely controlled anger. She told him to remove the handcuffs immediately. Coulter hesitated. He started to argue that the investigation wasn't complete. Foster cut him off. She told him there was no investigation. She told him there was no crime. She told him to take the cuffs off right now, before he made this any worse than it already was. Coulter removed the handcuffs. His hands were visibly shaking. For a long moment, he just stood there, as the reality of what he had done started to sink in. He had handcuffed a Supreme Court law clerk. He had searched him without consent or probable cause. He had filed a false report with 911, and all of it had been recorded by multiple witnesses and the store's security system. His career was over, and somewhere in his mind, Coulter had to know it. But instead of apologizing and trying to minimize the damage, Coulter made it worse. He muttered that Marcus should carry his badge more visibly if he didn't want these misunderstandings. He suggested that Marcus should have been more cooperative. Foster stepped between them. She told Coulter that he needed to leave the store immediately and that he should expect a call from Internal Affairs. Marcus had not moved. He stood rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left red marks. He watched Coulter's career implode with an expression of weary recognition. He had seen this before. He had studied cases exactly like this one. He knew exactly how much power he now held. He asked Foster for Coulter's full name and badge number. Foster provided them without hesitation. She also gave Marcus her card and the case number for the incident report she would be filing. Marcus thanked her. He asked if he was free to leave. She said yes, with an apology on behalf of the department. Before leaving, Marcus gathered his scattered groceries. He picked up the bag of apples from the floor. He retrieved his wallet, his phone, his Supreme Court badge. He took photos of everything. The scene, his bruised wrists, the officers present. He was building a case, and Coulter could only stand there and watch. Marcus paid for his groceries at the register. The cashier did not charge him. The manager appeared and apologized profusely, offering him a gift card that he politely declined. He walked out of the store with his head held high, his dignity intact despite everything that had been done to strip it away. Behind him, the witnesses who had recorded the incident were already uploading their videos. The first one hit Twitter before Marcus even reached his car. The videos went viral within hours. The teenage girl who first started recording posted her footage with a caption explaining what she had witnessed. By midnight, the video had 400,000 views. By the next morning, it had over 3 million. The story was picked up by local news first, then national outlets. A Supreme Court law clerk, handcuffed by an off-duty cop for shopping while black in Arlington. The story wrote itself. Type justice in the comments if you think Coulter got what he deserved. The Supreme Court issued a rare public statement confirming Marcus's employment and expressing concern about the incident. Justice Kagan herself reportedly made calls to ensure Marcus was supported. Coulter's history came out quickly after that. 14 years on the force and 11 citizen complaints in his file. 9 of those complaints involved stops of black citizens. 5 specifically mentioned racial profiling. 3 involved physical contact during stops that were later deemed unjustified. The Arlington County Police Department had flagged some of these incidents. Coulter had received verbal counseling twice. He had been required to take a half-day implicit bias training once. But he had never faced serious discipline. No suspensions, no demotions, no real consequences. That failure of oversight was about to cost the department millions. More victims came forward once the news broke. A black doctor who had been stopped by Coulter while jogging through his own neighborhood. A black real estate agent who had been questioned by Coulter while showing a house. A black teenager who had been detained by Coulter for walking home from basketball practice. The stories were all the same. The aggressive approach, the suspicious questions, the assumption of guilt, the refusal to believe explanations. Marcus gave one interview to the Washington Post. He was measured and professional. He said he didn't want to be the face of police reform, but he felt obligated to speak out. If this could happen to someone with his credentials and connections, what happened to people who didn't have his resources? The interview resonated because Marcus didn't perform outrage. He simply stated facts and let the audience draw their own conclusions. Coulter was suspended without pay within 48 hours of the incident. 2 weeks later, he was formally terminated. The official statement cited violations of departmental policy, conduct unbecoming an officer, and failure to uphold constitutional standards. But the criminal charges were still coming. The Commonwealth's attorney for Arlington County reviewed the case and determined that Coulter's actions met the threshold for criminal prosecution. He was charged with assault and battery, false imprisonment, and filing a false police report. Each charge carried potential jail time. If you made it this far, you're part of the solution. Subscribe and share this story so others can learn from it. The trial took place 9 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed every day. Local media covered it extensively. National outlets sent reporters. The prosecution's case was straightforward and devastating. They had 4 separate cell phone videos showing the entire encounter. They had the store's security footage from multiple angles. They had the 911 call recording, where Coulter's lies were preserved in his own voice. They had the testimony of Officers Foster and Park, who both stated that Coulter's actions were unjustified and that Marcus had been completely cooperative. Coulter's defense tried to argue that he had genuinely believed he was witnessing a theft. The argument failed spectacularly when the prosecution showed that Coulter's body language was aggressive before Marcus ever reached for his phone. The videos showed him targeting Marcus before anything supposedly suspicious had occurred. The defense tried to argue that the Supreme Court badge could have been fake. The prosecution called an expert from the Supreme Court Police, who explained the multiple security features that made the badges essentially impossible to counterfeit. The defense tried to argue that Marcus's calm demeanor was suspicious, that innocent people usually react with more emotion. This argument backfired badly when the prosecution pointed out that black men are often told to remain calm and compliant during police encounters specifically to avoid being hurt or killed. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. Guilty on all 3 counts. Coulter showed little emotion as the verdict was read. His wife, sitting in the front row, began crying. His daughter, a college student who had come home for the trial, stared at the floor. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The judge acknowledged Coulter's years of public service, but emphasized that his betrayal of public trust was severe. Officers who violated citizens' rights under color of law had to face meaningful consequences, or the system would never improve. The sentence: 18 months in jail, 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent prohibition from working in any law enforcement capacity. Coulter would serve his time in the county jail. He would be released after 12 months for good behavior. But his life as a police officer was permanently over. The civil trial came separately. Marcus filed a federal lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 for violation of his civil rights. He sued Coulter personally and the Arlington County Police Department for its failure to address Coulter's pattern of behavior. The civil trial lasted 6 days. The evidence was even more damning than in the criminal case, because the standard of proof was lower and the scope was broader. The jury returned a verdict of $3.2 million, $800,000 in compensatory damages for Marcus's emotional distress, reputational harm, and physical injuries. $2.4 million in punitive damages as a message that this behavior would not be tolerated. Arlington County's taxpayers would foot most of that bill, but the real cost was to the department's reputation and to every officer who would now work under enhanced scrutiny. Coulter's conviction and the massive civil verdict sent shockwaves through law enforcement in the region. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was accountability. Coulter's police pension was forfeited due to his felony convictions. 14 years of service, gone. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. He could never work as a cop again anywhere in the country. He was 47 years old, with no other professional skills. Finding employment with his record would be nearly impossible. His marriage fell apart during the trial. His wife filed for divorce, citing the stress and shame of his public downfall. His personal life suffered further when his daughter gave an interview to a local news station. She said she loved her father but could not defend what he had done. She said the family had made excuses for him for years, and she was done making excuses. The Arlington County Police Department faced a Department of Justice pattern and practice investigation. Federal investigators reviewed complaint files, training records, disciplinary actions, and stop data going back a decade. What they found was systemic. Black drivers were stopped at 3.4 times the rate of white drivers in the county. Complaints against officers for racial profiling were sustained at a rate of only 2%. Officers with multiple complaints, like Coulter, rarely faced meaningful discipline. The county entered into a consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms. New training programs, reformed complaint processes, civilian oversight boards, early warning systems for officers showing patterns of bias, and mandatory review of all stops for racial disparities. 3 supervisors who had reviewed Coulter's previous complaints without taking action were demoted. The chief of police announced his retirement, effective immediately. Marcus returned to his work at the Supreme Court. He finished his clerkship with distinction and was offered positions at 3 of the top law firms in Washington. He ultimately chose to join the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where he could use his skills to help others who had experienced what he had experienced. He never sought the spotlight. He gave a few more interviews, always measured and thoughtful. He testified before Congress about police reform. He helped draft model legislation for civilian oversight of police departments. But mostly, he just went back to work. He had a purpose now. He was going to spend his career making sure what happened to him in that grocery store became less common for everyone who came after him. The story of what happened in that Whole Foods is not just about one bad cop and one innocent man. It's about a system that allowed officers like Coulter to operate for 14 years with 11 complaints and no real consequences. It's about the assumptions that made Coulter look at a well-dressed black man buying groceries and see a criminal. Marcus Webb never asked to become a symbol or a test case. He was simply buying ingredients for his girlfriend's birthday dinner when he was handcuffed, searched, and humiliated in front of strangers. A Yale law graduate, a Supreme Court clerk, a man trusted with the nation's most sensitive legal documents. And he still wasn't safe from being profiled and mistreated by an officer who had already decided his guilt based on nothing more than his race. That reality is uncomfortable for many people to accept, but accepting it is necessary for any real change to occur. For anyone watching who might face something similar, remember this. Document everything. Get badge numbers and names. Find witnesses. File formal complaints. Follow up relentlessly. The system often fails, but sometimes, when the evidence is undeniable and people refuse to stay silent, accountability happens. Raymond Coulter made a choice that evening. He saw a black man in a grocery store and decided that man didn't belong there. He decided to confront him. He decided to ignore his credentials. He decided to put him in handcuffs anyway. He thought he had power, and Marcus had none. He thought he could mistreat someone and face no consequences. He was wrong. That choice cost him his career, his freedom, his pension, his family, and his reputation. It cost his department millions of dollars and years of federal oversight. It cost every officer in that department the trust of the community they were supposed to serve. And it proved once again that the truth has a way of coming out, that cameras are everywhere, that witnesses will step forward, that accountability is possible when brave people insist on it.